This session is about ArcGIS Rest JS. I'm Dave Bowman, this is Tom Wason. We both are part of the R&D Center in Washington, D.C., except that Tom lives in California and I live in Colorado, so figure that out. But we like it that way, so it works out well. So what is ArcGIS Rest JS? You all came here, so clearly it seemed interesting. This is a set of low-level portal and server API wrappers to allow you to write basically exactly the same code whether you're doing stuff in Node or inside of a modern browser. What does it do? Generally, this is going to provide a level of abstraction over the portal and server APIs, right? We're going to handle the authentication, we handle server federation, the various different types of encoding that you need to do in order to go send JSON to the API. We convert it into the actual wire formats, and then we give you slightly more informative error codes, which is good, as in your promises will fail if you get a 200 that contains a 400, if anybody's ever had that experience. Yeah, a few of you, right? So this actually will do that. Your promise will reject if you get that back. The goals for this project were pretty straightforward. Even within Esri, there were dozens of different implementations of a clean way to talk to the portal API. There's obviously the JS API itself, but then a lot of people needed to write code in Node, and they wanted to just do ES6 classes, so on and so forth. And what we wanted to do is simply say, okay, as a company, let's stop doing the same thing 40 times differently with a lot of poor implementation. Let's do it once. Let's build a really consistent API that's going to work. Let's make sure this is super a la carte. Pick and choose just the pieces that you want. You don't have to bring in a huge thing. It doesn't have any framework involved. The actual code is written in TypeScript, but what you use when you use it in a runtime environment is just vanilla JavaScript. We're trying to hide the various idiosyncrasies of the API, which if you've written your own code to talk to it, you've experienced some of them. And we're going to align with the broader JavaScript ecosystem. So make sure that this is a good library for today, tomorrow, and many years to come. In terms of comparison, you can kind of think about this as being a subset of what the Python API for Python is. I mean, we don't do machine learning and all kinds of other stuff, but in terms of this access to the portal and the ArcGIS server APIs. And it's a totally different beast from the JS API. Most notably, we don't do maps, right? We're just an API wrapper. Also notably, we're completely open source. So there's that. The repo is github.com, Esri ArcGIS Rest JS. This is also on the slide at the end when we wrap up. So on that note, we'll give a shout out to the 30-ish people who have forked our repo. And what's kind of cool about having this open source library, I mean, we definitely encourage people to open pull requests, but if you need something, file an issue or start a pull request, and there's a pretty good chance it's something that we're going to need somewhere if it doesn't already exist. Finish it off, and many times we'll submit the pull request. And
are there any contributors here? Anybody that's contributed?
Any of the people here? So these are like the non-Esri contributors. Yay! Awesome. Yeah, super. So it's super great to have people submitting stuff and features into this. So that's cool. What's in it? We have 10 different modules, or NPM packages is the end result. We have the request and auth system. We have wrappers over the items API, so CRUD for items, sharing, groups, users, and then the kind of extended services. We have a routing system, a geocode system, full access feature services in terms of both querying them, adding, editing, destroying them, and then the FS admin so you can create views and dynamically create feature services on the fly. We have documentation, excuse me, which is pretty important for this sort of a library. So there's a site, if you go to the repo right at the very top, there's a link out to it. It's hosted on GH Pages. And this is just, not meaning to see the details of this, but the idea is you get a reference of all the different packages and the functions in them. And then when you actually go into a function, most of the time there'll be some sort of a code sample that you can hopefully work from. And then at the bottom of any of these functions, there'll be a link directly into the source code. Again, open source, yay. And then I wanted to point out here that at the top, this is showing the actual sample that is in the documentation, because the entire thing is automatically built directly from the code. It's using TSDoc and a whole bunch of tooling that Patrick Alt put together for us, and John has graciously helped keep in sync. But every time we do a release of this, it rolls the entire doc website. So the whole thing is kept in sync. Fantastic tooling. If you are doing any sort of projects like this yourself, you might want to actually just pull the repo and look at the tooling in it, because all that's open too. So if you want to automatically generate docs from your TypeScript and that sort of thing, super rad. Another thing about this repo is it's set up such that if you submit a pull request and you change the code coverage, so this is unit test coverage. If the unit test coverage number goes down, the pull request gets this big flag on it. So we started at 100%, and we're still maintaining it at 100% code coverage, which is pretty good for a relatively, comprehensive library. What we ship, so when you npm install any of these things, it's going to contain ES6 modules, UMD packages so that you can use this from Require or from Dojo, and then CommonJS modules so that you can use it directly from Node. And that will just, you npm install once, you get all of these things, so you can use it the same way if you're writing a React project or you're writing a Node project. The docs have a really good section here on getting started. It talks about pulling stuff directly from our CDN, which is, Tom has a demo. That's the thing he literally just finished up here, was something pulling off the CDN. Babel and Webpack, TypeScript and Webpack, working with Dojo and AMD. So there's a bunch of examples up there. Wanted to mention that this is used in production by us. So we are on the ArcGIS Hub team. So this is a central underpinning inside everything that we do inside of Hub. The next version of Story Maps is leaning on this very heavily. So is the next version of Web App Builder. Urban and Solutions are using this. ArcGIS Enterprise, the sites portion of that is all based on top of this stuff, as well as internal professional services, and our international partners are really starting to leverage this library. My point about that is this is not something that we just whipped up in the last 10 minutes and threw over the fence, and your mileage may vary. We rely on this. So whether or not you use it, this thing's going to be maintained over time. So my intro part of this thing is really to try and talk a little bit about the philosophy of building a library for ourselves as well as for our broader community. We want to have happy developers. We want to be happy developers. We want tooling that's going to work for us. And one of the things very early on that we wanted to make sure that we were nailing was mobile first. And even though this is a headless library, right, it's just for talking to the API, we wanted to make sure that what we were doing at this low level was not going to be a burden to your application. If you're trying to build a high performance, really light application, we don't want our library to be the thing that's slowing it down. So that meant focusing on building very small payloads. And in terms of the small payloads, we wanted to show this, right? The request library is under 3K, the auth part of it is 3 kilobytes, and then a geocoder is measured in bytes. You want to do feature service admin, that's 680 bytes, and then the sharing API is 1.2. This whole thing, your worst case scenario is 15K. It's half the size of React itself. So it's super, super light. Additionally, the way it's constructed is it's all about functions. It takes a functional approach, and so we'll kind of contrast that if we had done it a different way. And there are some existing projects on GitHub that took this approach, and they said, okay, well, let's go ahead and create a portal class. And then you could do something like, I'm going to import portal from some library, and then I'm going to instantiate it, and I'm going to issue a query, and then I get results back. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, very friendly code to write. And that's super awesome, except if you are somebody who's trying to write that really lightweight application, right? Your portal class is going to have more than just the .search. It's going to go and have all kinds of stuff. So if we kind of look at structure of code like this, we have our class, and it's got a constructor in it, and then it's got a stack of methods. Now, in order for those methods to play by like an object hierarchy type thing, those methods are going to return instances of the other objects. So if I issued a search, then I wouldn't just hand you back JSON objects, I would hand you back instances of item objects. Well, this is a rough approximation of part of the portal information model. And the tricky part becomes, well, okay, if I did the search and I got an item, then the item is probably going to need an instance of the user that owns it. And then that user also has groups. And you very quickly, this thing is almost viral, and you end up building a bigger and bigger object graph. And it's really, really hard to separate it. So if you're building an application that is basically doing, rebuilding ArcGIS Online with all the capabilities of manipulating all these things, that's not bad. But if you're trying to build a really focused mobile app that just needs to query some stuff or see a list of things, that's not going to be very good, because it's really hard for you to optimize out the code that you're not using. So this is classically called the banana gorilla problem, where if you have a class-based object hierarchy, you may want the banana, but you end up with the gorilla and the entire jungle that they're sitting in. So if you ever read Coders at Work, this is a quote from Joe Armstrong. Now let's contrast that with taking a function approach, right? Which is just that. What we have is Node modules that are, or they're JavaScript modules that just expose functions. And so you end up working with it by importing just the functions that you want from the package that you want. And then your build system, Webpack or Babel, whatever you're doing with that, it's going to just include the code and the functions that you actually need. So that's awesome, because while those packages were already really small, you can get way smaller in that thing. So you can, I don't know if you're going to whip up a little demo of that or not. No? Do we show anything with Webpack? We don't. Trust us. It gets really small.
John, you got 45 minutes.
You got 45 minutes to the end. John's going to whip something out. Okay. If this idea about functions and building software like this is the least bit interesting, I'm giving a talk tomorrow about functional programming with JavaScript. And it's all just the backgrounds and why you would do this, and a whole lot more in depth with that stuff. So if this is just too much for you and you really want that experience of like new portal, what's cool is it's open source. And you can go ahead and literally grab the code that are the underlying functions, and you can compose a set of classes on top of that. This is kind of the nice thing about taking this approach. By us shipping this project that is just the low-level functions, you can compose up. Whereas if we shipped you the classes, it would be very hard to decompose down. If you are interested in doing that at all, I would recommend this book, Composing Software by Eric Elliott, who talks about exactly this style of thing. Working in mostly functional code and still composing classes out of it to lean into an object space if you need to. So that's kind of the philosophy and the intro section. And with this, we're going to shift it over to Mr. Wason, who's going to dazzle us with some code and examples.
So, as Dave alluded to earlier, the sort of scheduling of these talks, this talk is, in our minds, is going to come after. So we kind of skipped over the part of like what you can do with it, right? So we didn't talk too much about how you can, fetch these items from portals, search items from that. And we'll show that, but I think one of the things that we really wanted to talk about, we did this talk last year when we just introduced it. There were a lot of questions around auth. And so we wanted to spend some time, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here talking about auth, sort of cart before the horse. We'll sort of show what you do once you're authenticated, like you can search for items or you can query features, but we're going to kind of do things a little out of order here. So in particular, browser auth. If you've used the ArcGIS API, you're probably familiar with Identity Manager and how that works. And in some ways, the auth that we provide within RestJS's own package called auth that is similar to that, except that it has a different API. It's functional, as Dave says. Ours only handles one identity at a time. It doesn't have like a multiple credential store the way that Identity Manager does. And, well, of course, there's no official support for it, right? It's just open source. So if it doesn't work for your scenario, then you just got to open an issue. So, okay, so it's not at all like Identity Manager is kind of what I'm getting at, except for the OAuth Webflow. So that we, like I said, we are using this in production. Multiple projects at Esri are using this in production. So it supports the core, way that we intend for your users to authenticate with our platform, which is via OAuth. There are other authentication schemes that are in use within Esri, token and Windows and PKI and all kinds of other stuff. And you can pretty much do all of that with this, but what is really built into our library is handling all the common scenarios for OAuth flow. So the way, if you're not familiar with OAuth Flow, you've got an application like this. It has a sign-in button. When you click on that, it opens up another window, whether it redirects to another window or opens it up in a pop-up that is actually, that window is being served from ArcGIS.com. And it includes your client ID in the URL as well as a redirect URI. And you have to go first to ArcGIS.com and register an application, get this client ID, and say, where is anyone that sends me, that tries to authenticate this, what are the valid redirect URIs? We're not going to get into the details of this, but is everyone vaguely familiar with this? Hopefully. Okay, good. If not, it's all docked on the ArcGIS Online. And the user enters their credentials, and they are, once validated, they are sent to returns a 302 that redirects them to a redirect page that lives inside your application, which pulls the token. It's got the token in the query in the URL. The redirect page pulls it out and passes this over to the library that needs it in for JavaScript API or in our case Rest JS. So as I said, we have this class called user session, and one of its methods here that it supports is begin OAuth 2, which will do all of that work for you the way that we have the same OAuth examples in ArcGIS API. And we have several examples of how to do this. So that app that we just saw up there on the screen, we can take a look at that right now. And so here is that actual application running in production. This application happens to be written in React, but this flow could be used in with any framework. Here's the sign in. And did that actually work? Yep. So it's got, now I'm signed in, shows my username, sign out button. Very simple, right? So if we want to take a look at like kind of what that code looks like in here, this is the actual code from that application. So it imports user session from RestJS. There's a sign-in function that's called by that button, right, the click handler. And it calls this begin OAuth 2. It passes into client ID, the portal, which is just, in our case, www.arcgis.com. That's essentially the base URL for whatever portal you're using. And in this case, we wanted to use pop-up, although we could have just used the redirect flow, and then the URL to the redirect page. Inside that redirect page, the RestJS does provide you some functions to help you parse everything out of the query string and pass and initialize the session. So we just pull in that one little bit of JavaScript that we need to do that, and then that becomes available. Now here, because this redirect page doesn't have React running in it or anything like that, we're just using the UMD global, ArcGIS Rest global, and we just call the complete OAuth 2, which causes this promise over here that was returned by begin OAuth 2 to be fulfilled with a user session. And that session has the token, and that session is what we pass in to all subsequent requests for items or groups or any kind of REST operations that we're going to do. That session also has a function to get the user information. So if you need to show, like in the case of this application, we're showing, we showed my username here, or my actual name, not my username. So it has a get user, which returns the JSON for the user. And in the React application, we're storing that in state, and then we pass those things into the user menu. So that's pretty typical. If you don't want to see this all muddled up with React, that we have in the ArcGIS Rest JS repository, we have a browser, OAuth 2 browser example, and this lets you do all the different variations there, whether you want to use pop-up or not. You can just put your client ID in right there, and so it's a real handy way to do it. And one thing, though, I would like to show, this is the demo we were working on while you guys were all coming in. It kind of explains not just how you would do it, but a little bit about why you would do it. So here is the ArcGIS, the sample for the ArcGIS JavaScript API, that OAuth 2 sample that we're probably all familiar with. It has, it shows, using the ArcGIS classes and creating a new OAuth info and then going and fetching the items using their portal API. So we rewrote that sample about 30 minutes ago with Rest JS. And so this is the JS API one. And what this does is, once I sign in, it's going to show a list of thumbnails for items that I have. So if you have an application like this, and obviously not exactly like this, but it's not using any mapping things, right? We don't really need to get all of this, 413 kilobytes of JavaScript just to fetch, these little thumbnails like this, right? So if we were to do this with Rest JS, fingers crossed. So it's the same thing, and sorry, I should have looked at it just for. So if we look at just this initial page before anyone's seen anything, with Rest JS we have 13 kilobytes of JavaScript. So if we go back to the ArcGIS API sample, sign out, just to be fair, because a whole bunch of JavaScript was fetched as we pulled that stuff down. But here, we still have 413 kilobytes just for that initial page. So we're talking about almost 2 orders of magnitude difference in terms of the bytes that are uploaded up front. Now, obviously, this is just a sample page, and so it's not representative of how you would necessarily use it. But if you don't need that advanced mapping capability, then this might be something you can do. Okay, back to slides. And somehow I managed not to hit play from beginning. I did like every single time. Dave makes me do PowerPoint. I don't like it. So one thing, another sample that we have up there that's pretty cool is just a retry, so OAuth retry. So, probably the way your application is going to work in reality is you won't have the user logged in, and then you can let them go and try and request things. And then all of a sudden, when they request something that requires authentication, you then want to show a pop-up, right? You don't want to necessarily force them to pop up. So, or show an error message telling them that they need to pop up. So. This is pretty cool. Rest.js has specific error types built into it. So essentially, you catch any error that happens on that request, and you check the name of the error. And if it's ArcGIS auth error, it will have this retry function, which takes a callback. And in that callback, you can do whatever you need to do to log the user in. Like in our case. Begin that OAuth 2 call flow, or if you had some other authentication scheme, you could make that happen. And then is when that is, as soon as that flow is done, then it will automatically retry the same request that it just did. So that's a cool sample worth checking out. So identity manager. We talked about this notion that identity manager manages identities, not just one. It has multiple credentials in its store. And in ArcGIS, we just have one, that user session just has one portal, really corresponds to one portal user. So one key thing is that we do support that one user can connect to multiple servers that are federated, and we will cache the list of servers that are federated for that user account. So it's not like they'll be continually prompted to log in to any individual servers that are federated with that portal. And that's the main sort of use for kind of having multiple identities or multiple sets of credentials. But if you need to have multiple actual identities, like different actual portal users in your application, and this is something that we do in the hub under certain admin screens, the admin needs to emulate another user. It's possible. We use multiple user session objects. So it's instead of having one identity manager. And so what you're really missing out on is this experience. So if anyone's familiar with this experience, it is if you, and I'm not talking about when you're not logged in at all and just using token authentication. I'm talking about when a user is logged in, but they are trying to access, they open up a web map that they have permission to see, but that web map has a layer on it that is not federated with their account. And very cool, in a very, very cool way, the ArcGIS API doesn't just bail out. It provides this user interface to let that user log in if they have the credentials to do it. So we don't have anything like this, right? We don't have a notion of anything like this, and we're not going to build this. For a couple of reasons. I mean, for one thing, we're not going to build anything with UI, right? Dave talked about this very low-level API. So, if you want to have your own login screen with UI that enters, where users enter username and password, you can do that instead of OAuth flow and generate a token, and you can have token auth in your application without any kind of OAuth. You just have to write your own dialogue because we don't know what framework you're using. We don't want to impose digit on you or impose React components or anything like that. That's one reason we're not going to build it. But you can build something like this, and we have toyed with the idea of making this easier. We've had an issue open for this, and it's something that we might actually kind of build for one of our products. Essentially, to build this, what you would need to do, user session extends an interface called authentication manager, and that was deliberately built by Patrick Arlt in a way such that it could handle multiple credentials. So you could build something called identity store and have it implement this interface, and you would just manage those credentials under the hood. So the interface is already there. It's something you could extend, and it's something that we may make some headway into building for just the low-level part, not the UI part. And you may not even need to, because if you're using an application like this, where someone's going to have a web map with a layer that may not be federated to their portal, you're probably going to want to be, you've got the JS API, and at that point, you probably want to let it take over identity. So the pattern that we use a lot is Rest JS runs before the JS API is loaded. We lazy load the JS API, and so until someone needs a map, we're not going to load the JavaScript API. Rest is doing all its work during that time, and then hey, you've got the JavaScript API. Here you go, JavaScript API. You can have my credentials. So session has a to-credential function that formats everything the session has in the format that JS API needs to add a credential. It also can read credentials from the JS API in the format that it provides them. So, here's there's a demo of this in the RestJS repo. Here's the relevant code. Basically, session's going to go and through making a request to something, get token on the session will be called. It will have the credentials, and then later on, when the JS API is loaded, you just call Esri ID register token session to credential. And vice versa, if you for some reason had the JS API running and didn't have RestJS, but then you brought RestJS in later and you wanted to give it a credential, you could do this. I can't really think of a scenario where you'd want to do this. As Dave sort of mentioned, all the functions inside RestJS are really a subset of what's in the JS API. There are a couple things that are maybe not necessarily in the JS API, like feature service admin. I don't know. It's hard to imagine anything not being in the JS API. But probably not a useful scenario, but we show you how to do it. That example is right here. And again, it's in the repo. So a question we got last year, and we've gotten a couple times, is, well, does it work with such and such scenario? And the answer is sure, theoretically. So we don't have a battery of QA people that run this through all the possible PKI, Windows token scenarios on all the different machines in all the different browsers and different kinds of security contexts. We do ship it though in enterprise, right? So it's not just running in our ArcGIS Online application, production online application, but it's also running in enterprise. It's the identity layer that's used for sites in enterprise. So, and so far, in however many months, no complaints. And in theory, all this stuff should work. But just like full disclosure, we are not testing this the way that the JavaScript API is tested around this kind of all the different edge cases. You may have, like when we released this, it was sort of our idea was that OAuth was the 80-20 rule. And since then, because it's open source, a couple people have made pull requests to handle certain situations. So now we're like 85-15, right? You may have some very special security practices in your organization, and that's just great. We would love to hear from you. If you're able to give this a try and you are not able to get it working, we want it to work for all the scenarios. But one of the great things about this library is we're not encumbered the way the JS API team is to have to support every sort of scenario that they supported for every single one-off customer over the last however many years. So using this inside of frameworks, this is going to be a really boring section of this talk. I'm sure you're all thinking, oh my God, this is boring? I thought the last part was the boring part. Because there's not much to do at all. In fact, should be a refreshing change, in fact. That's a way to think of it. This is going to be the relaxing part because it's like really easy to do. To install it, you just npm install. To use it, you just import these functions through the magic of Webpack, TypeScript, or Rollup, whatever module loader you're using. It will work with all these. And then when you need to execute the functions, you're going to tap into your framework's lifecycle hooks that are designed to do fetching data or all that sort of stuff. So all of them have their own lifecycle hooks, and we'll take a look a little bit what's special. Of course, Ember's special. Ember, you can't just install packages. Well, you sort of can, but it has its own ecosystem that sits on top of NPM called add-ons, and so our application is Ember, in the hub is Ember, so we've created wrappers for all these. They're not like one-to-one with all the packages in RestJS. As Dave said, there are 10. There's only a couple of them, so we bundle up all these portal-related ones into something called Ember ArcGIS Portal Services. We bundle up the server-related ones into ArcGIS Server Services, and then all the auth is bundled up into Tori Provider ArcGIS, which is a plugin for Ember's Tori authentication system. Probably not a lot of, how many Ember users here? Okay, cool. So that's there for you. In this case, I'm not even going to talk about this stuff. You already know. So there's a lot of cool examples for frameworks that are out there in the wild. Under the demos folder in the repo is a Vue example that Ian wrote, which was super awesome. He contributed that. And it looks just like the auth example, the official browser auth example. So it's pretty cool. It lets you sign in and in a Vue, in a idiosyncratic Vue way. And then I already showed you that create ArcGIS app application. That was the one where you could search for items. That's a React application. And then there's an Ember version of that same application called ambitious ArcGIS apps. So isomorphic applications. These are applications where you can run the same JavaScript on the client and the server. Is anybody doing this? Wow. That's awesome. And that's, I expected like one person, but yeah, I'm not too surprised. The benefit is SEO, right? So your code is rendered, your JavaScript code that fetches data and fills out templates is rendered on the server, and then you get actual information in the HTML instead of one div that your whole application is then mounted into. And so search engines love this, right? It makes it easier for them to parse things, and you get good SEO. And if you have a giant server farm backing everything, then you can get good performance out of this too. But this is something that's really important to hub sites and pages, right? SEO is something we want to have our content be searchable. So it's something that we do a lot of work in, but it's hard to do it right. That's my hot take on it. Isomorphic's hard. So, but nonetheless, we have an example that I can show you, which just to illustrate the point. And all right, so this looks familiar, probably. It's the same application, but this time written with a different React framework called Next.js. And if you are going to dip your toes in the server-side rendering water, Next.js is a great place to start. You really want to do it with something like this that is like it's designed to do server-side rendering. That's like part of its mission statement, and so, it works just like the other application, except that when you view the source of this page, if you look for something that's unique over here, like Reading Beer Week here, that this was actually rendered on the server, the HTML that's behind this. And then, once the page was loaded, it has now become a full, React application, so it's interactive. And everything works. The map that you see here is a JavaScript API map that was loaded after the page render. So some considerations if you're doing this is that every framework provides lifecycle hooks that it will do things. Certain lifecycle hooks will not be executed on the server. That's where you stick anything related to the JS API. JS API can't run a node, so you can't render a map on the server. You don't want to render a map on the server anyway. You could put a placeholder in if you want. And then the other sort of, how this app works. Next.js provides us get initial props, sort of a special lifecycle hook that runs both on the server and the client. And this is where we initialize our session, and then later on, after we have that session, we run the search for the items right here. So we get these, and then we render them. And we just render them, React is just run on the server to render this stuff on the server. The only real thing that you got to watch out for is how you rehydrate, how you get the session, right? So you can't prompt the user to log in on the server. So at this point, you need to use cookies. You need to store the session in cookies. And if someone has already logged in, it will be in their cookie. The server can read the cookie, and then it will pass it along to the search. That's all I have. I hope I left you some time. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So I'm going to talk about, see that this shows up over here. So far it's, okay, cool. So at the beginning, I mentioned that part of using this library is the idea that you could use it similar to what you might be doing with the Python API for ArcGIS. And that is to basically build your own custom, one-off, hacky, horrible tooling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, right? So I'm a developer on the hub team. And I do a lot of work surrounding an area of the hub that basically allows you to take an existing solution, which may be like a story map that's got multiple web maps associated with it that's connected to a website, take that entire thing, template the entire system of that, turn it into a big JSON ball, and then later be able to say, okay, I now want to rehydrate that entire structure, but customize it for the current organization that I'm working with. And so whenever you're doing like automated creation of things as a developer, what you tend to do is break a lot of stuff, right? I leave an incredible wake of garbage inside the organization that I work against as a developer. And so every now and again, I need to go in there and burn it with fire. So I'm going to show you some code. I think legally I have to tell you these sort of things, right? Do not run this code. Seriously, do not do this. Bad things will happen, and it's on GitHub. So let's go look at it. So suppose you find this on GitHub and you scroll down, it literally says, this will destroy things, you do not want to use it, run away, you've been warned. Okay, so I'm actually going to run this. And we'll take a look at the code, and that is, of course, over here. This is doing code mirroring? No. Why? Okay, hang on a second here. Apparently, this really wants, I don't know, what?
See, it's that PowerPoint here.
Oh, that is weird. I can't even find them. Oh, well, this will be more fun. Okay, give me one moment here. Displays. We're going to just set it up so it's mirroring here. Arrangement, mirror. This will make it so much easier to type, seeing as I really can't see the screen. Okay, so what I wanted to show in here is not so much the details of this, but if you've ever worked with Python and you're just doing like, oh, I've got a bunch of garbage in my org and I want to clean it up, that's what you would be doing here. So I've imported a variety of the different helper functions. So what this is specifically going to do, it's going to log into one of my QA orgs as me and very, very specifically go and absolutely burn with fire anything related to broken survey 123 things that I've created. And it's pretty straightforward. If you're a JavaScript developer, I mean, I've never really gotten into Python. The whole significant white space thing just gives me the EBGBs. I'm more down with the curly brackets. So that's me, and it makes me happy. So I just have like these helper functions, remove forms, remove orphan services, remove the empty folders, and then this one here is like, don't do this, very bad things. And this removes services. So I'll save this up. And then it's just a whole bunch of functions, right? Simple, happy-go-lucky functions. This one's running a query. It's going to go get stuff back. And then it hands that stuff forward. Oh, it hands it right into delete form. So it does a query, gets the things, burns it with fire. So let's go and switch to another desktop where we're just going to press the button and see what happens. Oh, missing script, clean surveys. Oh, clear surveys. That would be the thing, right? npm, just node, clear surveys. Oh. It'd be really good if I had any time before I got this stuff. All right.
My fault.
Invalid shorthand property initializer. Yeah. NVM use? What version of Node do I need with this? I thought I set this up. Okay, anyways, this is an awesome demo. Is anytime you decide to like actually run something, I actually feel a little bit better with it not working because it really is savage. It's the sort of code that you just keep slashing against the org until everything is gone. But the idea was just to show that kind of like the Python API, you can use it to code or orchestrate against your environment. And now PowerPoint has gone bizarro land. It's running here, but not showing up over there. One moment. Let's It's always fun. You sign up for these things. Sure, I'll speak. It'll be great. What can possibly go wrong? Oh, all of it. Yeah, that sounds about right. Oh, the mirroring got turned off.
Now we can see your.
And yeah, what? I can't even. Can you just pull up we're at the last two slides and then we're going to take comments.
Yeah, you let's start with questions.
Okay, yeah, just start with questions and see if you can.
My laptop's died.
Oh. So this has gone really well at the end, but you should use this library because it's Bomber. It's awesome.
Stack Overflow says you should use a colon instead of an equal sign.
Oh, is that what I was doing wrong? Probably something like that. So do we have any questions? I mean, other than the why is this session before the intro session, but stick around because Patrick will tell you more about how to use it in a basic way. Anyone? Well, that got real quiet real fast, didn't it? I don't know. Should I just keep trying to get that running?
Hey, all right.
So in the title of this talk, you talked about it being Rest JS, but you didn't really talk anything in this talk about REST. I assume that all of this is based on sending REST API calls and accessing the actual contents of it.
Exactly. It's a wrapper over the REST APIs. That is what its job is. I mean, we could actually. Well, you're running this now. Yeah, please give survey responses because
no, don't.
it can be like people. They should really run the demos before they do it and not give out code that will wreck your org. That sort of great stuff. But yeah, that's all it is. I mean, if you brought up the actual code and you looked at it, I mean, the actual request function, or like an item something.
Like not
just a simple like get item thing. I mean, you just look at it. It just constructs the URL, tacks the token in, and sends it, and then you get the response back. It does do the juggling of the 500 and the 200 with the JSON. It hides a few little idiosyncrasies. But other than that, it's just a wrapper over the APIs and allows you to pick and choose the pieces you want in your app. That's it.
You would suggest if we were thinking about connecting to services via REST, that we would use this API as opposed to going directly to those REST calls.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to handle the idiosyncrasies of the platform, 200s and 500s sort of thing, as well as handle the authentication. It is integrated with the OAuth flow, which is really the way your apps should be authenticating against either portal or online. And yeah, it's going to take care of those details for you. It doesn't do much more. I mean, you could literally write this stuff using fetch and be almost there. And the talk I'm going to give tomorrow about functional JavaScript, the example in there doesn't use this because I make one call. And so I just am fetching data from a public service. If that's all you got to do, you know what's lighter than 1 kilobyte is 0. Don't use it. But there's a lot of things in here. So if you look at
this is stuff you don't want to do yourself every time,
right?
But it's basically a wrapper around fetch that knows about the idiosyncrasies of the ArcGIS API,
Right.
and then wrappers around that for searching items or searching groups or creating new items, creating groups, working with feature services.
Yeah.
So how complete is the coverage of the REST APIs?
That's a good question.
Pretty good.
It's decent.
Yeah, we do an awful lot of stuff in the hub, particularly with the whole idea about creating templates from other types of items. We need to know how to run over all those different types of items and then serialize them and then create new ones and create the feature services and share those things. And so I'd say it's probably upwards of 80% would be my just guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I did find out about the items/info area of the API. I didn't even know that existed. So there's a really bad half-cooked PR to add that support. But I don't know. Have we gotten any issues? John, do you know if we've gotten?
Yes, 30%.
Oh, you think?
Popular 30%.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the 20/80 rule. And in all fairness, the title of the talk did say tasty, and I don't think anything that we mentioned here is flavorful in any way. So
Right.
I wouldn't go by titles, just, you know.
Your mileage may vary there. But, yeah.
So Esri pushes the Python API for automating GIS server stuff in WebGIS. I also do not enjoy the white space. So is anybody else in Esri using this as just a general, or is there a movement to replace some of the Python API automation with doing things this way?
I mean, the word replace I would never use in the mixed company of people who like Python versus this. No, I mean, the Python, there's a huge investment in Python, and you saw all the machine learning stuff, and just like they're building all the Jupyter notebooks and all that integration. That is fantastic. This is just, I mean, if we're going to bother to write something, let's write it in a way where we can use it in all the environments that we want to use it. And I don't really see this extending beyond making calls to other services. Like this library, that's its job. There are other libraries that we are building that sit on top of this. So one of those is Hub.js. And we're talking a little bit about that in a talk tomorrow about Hub for developers, that sort of thing. It uses this as an underlying level, and it exposes how to do things in bigger chunks, actual platform orchestration that we need consistency across multiple applications. So at that level, we'll be doing that, and we would be exposing that, you know. It's TypeScript, so if you want to write a command line that's going to generate initiatives for you or sites, fantastic. It's just, we want to compose things in a way where it can be used anywhere. Yeah.
And another way to think, this is like Python for JS developers. You know, if this does what you want and you don't want to deal with white space, it's here for you.
Yeah.
Dave, I enjoyed your discussion on functional versus object-oriented. That was really good for me.
Cool.
I noticed though that the authentication portion of these seem to use some objects.
Yep.
I just wonder, I'm sure there's a good reason. I'm wondering what
it
storing the session.
Exactly. We just need something that can be stateful, and the idea that you can create multiple instances of these things if that is something that you need to do. It just was going to be easier to do it like that. I mean, if we were to go back and do it, I would probably use more of a mix-in style than an actual class, because it's JavaScript and it's all crazy. So you can just like compose things together and mix stuff in and be like, boom, look, it looks the same and acts the same, but it's not. But you know, hindsight's 20/20, and it works in that environment. And the nice thing is, right, we've buried it so deep in the Ember world. It's down in this authentication provider and hidden away from us, but exposed to the rest of the application through our app frameworks session management system. So you know, it's an instance. It's hidden way over here, and it comes back up, and it's accessible where we need it, when we need it, and the way we need it. But this library does not mean you have to do it like that for React or for Vue or for any other thing you want to do. So.
And part of what that thing does is keep the list of federated servers, like it has state.
Yeah.
So it's a function, if you wanted to, like, you know, Patrick wrote all of that part of it, so you know you could ask him in the next session, he could speak to it better. But I think that, you know, part of that idea of keeping at least some base level consistency with the OAuth flow and how that works in you know, in the JavaScript API, we're going to need to have state. So and session is something that, you know, is long lived throughout the life of your application, and you kind of, you know, you're gonna, if that just returned to you like the token and like object hash of all the things, you'd have to maintain that somewhere in your application. So, any other questions? Yes.
This may be a question more about the REST API and some things I don't know about it, but you know, one of the reasons that we often use Python rather than JavaScript to control things is that lower level and into more data models and services. Is there a way here where, maybe this is once again just REST API, but is there the ability to create data models instead of, you know, building a service, say in ArcGIS Online from a file to a database, and a service definition? Is there a way to do that via REST call so that you could actually, you know, say somebody's designing a data model in a web app and you're packaging it as you know, as JSON objects and just be able to spin up a new service with that data model?
You certainly wouldn't be able to read a file geodatabase in this. I mean, like maybe somebody wrote a Node library to do that. But the primitives are there to say if you have that data model in some sort of machine readable way, the primitives are there to say create a feature service, add these fields to it, create another feature service, make a relationship between them. Like that's the level we're talking about in here. And it's JavaScript, so if you can NPM install it, you can do it. Like if you wanted to do machine learning, you can NPM install the TensorFlow JavaScript and go nuts. So that's, you know, this is just a very small part of the ecosystem. And maybe at some point, that would be a super rad demo for next year. But
Yeah.
any more questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming, man.
Thank y'all. There's still